You need the likes of Pakistan. Pakistan's standing in Washington had been improving for quite some time, even before Pakistan's mediation.
Michael Kugelman is a frequent fixture on your TV screens. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and covers South Asia extensively. Today he's joining us from DC. We'll be talking to him about the Iran war, when does it end, Pakistan's role, and we'll also be talking to him about Afghanistan. Since the last 10 or 11 days, we've seen things escalating, and today even things have escalated further. Iran and US war, it doesn't seem to come to an end. Where do we go from here? Do we actually see some sort of peace or respite in the coming weeks, or is it a full-scale war now?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's very discouraging because it appeared that the war was coming to an end when we had the MOU that was concluded several weeks ago. But I think that what we're looking at here is the reality of two bitter rivals that have a hostile relationship with each other, and it's going to be very difficult to get them to both agree to stop fighting each other. I do think that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. I do think at the end of the day that both countries, the U.S. and Iran, have a very strong interest in figuring out a way to end this war and to get to a position where they could agree to end the war. Iran quite simply does not want to get hit by military force for good reason, whereas the United States, I would argue, the government, the Trump administration, politically could be damaged the longer that it continues to be in this war, and especially if the war were to escalate. So I think that in due course, we will have this war come to an end. But, I think that there's also several reasons we can get into them why I think that the U.S. and Iran are not yet ready to agree to hang it up, so to speak, and step off the battlefield. But I'd like to think that we'll get there eventually.
You used the phrase light at the end of the tunnel. Who is going to light that light?
Well, this comes back to the issue of international mediation, and we've seen Pakistan and particularly Pakistan and other countries step up and try to do everything they can to get the countries to agree to talk about agreeing to an end to the war. So obviously it comes down to the belligerents themselves, the Iranians and the Americans, to agree to stop fighting. But you need those third parties to incentivize the belligerents to agree to stop. And, in effect, you need the likes of Pakistan and others, Qatar and Turkey and Egypt and a number of other countries to essentially convince these warring parties that their interests are better served in not fighting than in fighting. And unfortunately, I think that's not as easy as it might sound because of the fact, as I said, that the U.S. and Iran, they have an incredibly bitter relationship really since the 50s, especially since the 70s. And, they're not going to agree to do this so quickly. But absolutely, I think that third-party mediation will continue to be crucial. And because Pakistan had led that effort up to this point, and it's continuing to play that role now, I think we're going to need to continue to look to the third parties to help get the sides to end their fighting.
Well, you mentioned Pakistan. I think it's a perfect segue for us because I want to talk to you about Pakistan's international standing, especially post-mediation Islamabad MOU. So Pakistan's stock has risen a lot in the last 4 to 5 months. What do you think, what is the actual standing of Pakistan in Washington right now post-Islamabad MOU?
That standing is very high in Washington. I would argue that it was in quite high even before the war started and before before Pakistan was playing this third-party mediation role. As you well know, very soon after the second Trump administration took office in early 2025, the relationship really very quickly got into a better place. And, you'll recall that when Trump made his first address to Congress in his second administration, which was March of last year, he publicly praised Pakistan for helping apprehend an Islamic State Khorasan terrorist. So I think that Pakistan's standing in Washington had been improving for quite some time, even before Pakistan's mediation role. But yes, given that we now have this very prominent position that Pakistan has taken in mediation, given that it helped get to a point where we had that U.S.-Iran MOU, and given that the Trump administration has continued to trust Pakistan, and we've heard the president say multiple times, he stated his support, his admiration, his trust for the field marshal, for the prime minister in particular, those two. It's quite positive, and I would not want to generalize. I would say that Pakistan's standing in Washington, particularly as seen from the White House, is very positive. But as you know, there continue to be a number of critics of Pakistan, particularly on Capitol Hill, in the Congress. But on the whole, I think that there's a strong view here in DC that Pakistan has genuinely played a very helpful, if not an essential, role in trying to push these two bitter rivals toward peace. And I think the fact that Pakistan has persevered, even now, with these setbacks to the peace process, with the two sides fighting again, Pakistan continues to carry out shuttle diplomacy. It continues to talk to both sides. I think that's being received very well here in Washington as well.
How much of a role do you think the May 2025 war with India played, especially when Pakistan was able to shoot down Indian jets, and it was well documented? How much of credit would you give to that episode?
Yeah, my sense is that the president was I don't know if I'd use the word impressed, but I think that he was struck in a positive way with that performance, and I'm sure that he was briefed and knew that India is a much larger country, a much more populous country than Pakistan, and that India might have appeared to have a clear advantage from the perspective of President Trump, and yet in the fact that Pakistan held its own and shot down several Indian jets. Yes, my understanding is that's something that impressed him. That, in combination for what appears to be his genuine admiration for the field marshal as well, and how he conducted that conflict from Pakistan's side. I think that helped Pakistan's cause. In the context of how the U.S. and how the Trump administration was looking at Pakistan as well. So, yeah, I think that the mediation in the Iran war is a much stronger factor in shaping Trump administration perceptions of Pakistan. But yes, I think you're right that there is something to be said about how Pakistan held its own in the war with India, and how that was able to, I think, make a positive impression on the president as well.
A lot of the experts, they say that Pakistan's defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, it has a larger connotation, especially after Iran-US war. They say that after Iran-US war, the powers in the Middle East, they have this sense that they cannot essentially rely on the United States alone for their security. And now they are seeking other alliances in the region, their regional partners, probably smaller powers, but they're reaching out to them. And Pakistan is one of those powers, and hence we saw that defense pact. Do you agree that Pakistan is also flexing its muscle in the neighborhood and Middle East as well?
Right. I mean, I know there's been some discussion about this idea of Pakistan as an emerging net security provider in the Middle East because of that defense pact with Saudi Arabia. There might be something to be said for that. I would also point to what appears to be an emerging informal arrangement between the Pakistanis, the Saudis, the Turks, and the Egyptians for some type of understanding on security cooperation. Yeah. But I don't think we're there yet. It's sort of a tricky thing to analyze, right? Absolutely. I think that it's a critical development. I think one could argue that it does make Pakistan a net security provider in a sense. But at the same time, Pakistan, I think, would be hesitant to invoke this very pact in the context of the U.S.-Iran war. So I think it may be better to look at the other sort of the geopolitical developments in the region, particularly how Pakistan is moving closer, not just to Saudi Arabia, but to Turkey and to Egypt with talk about deeper levels of security cooperation. I think that's something that Pakistan is much more comfortable about. It's not clear what that could lead to, but I do think that really could reflect how Pakistan is becoming a bigger player overall in the geopolitical architecture of the Middle East.
Lastly, talking about Afghanistan, Pakistan's equation with Afghanistan in the last couple of years, it hasn't been good. Pakistan is in active confrontation with Afghanistan, and Pakistan claims that, the Afghan Taliban regime has been unable to rein in on TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Do you agree with that assertion, or you think that Afghan Taliban, they do not have the capability to rein in on them or patrol their own borders, or essentially they are providing sanctuary and cover to TTP?
Well, I mean, it's very known that the TTP has had a strong presence in Afghanistan for quite some time, and it's also quite known that there's a deep historic relationship between the two Talibans, the Afghan and the Pakistan Talibans. And I think that the Afghan Taliban, if it truly wanted to, it could take steps to curb TTP. But I simply don't think that it would want to do that, because this is a militant group that has historically been close to the Afghan Taliban, and there's a strong track record of the Afghan Taliban not turning on its militant allies. And you could look at the Al Qaeda example for the U.S. Threatened a military invasion of Afghanistan if the Taliban didn't turn over Al Qaeda, and the Taliban did not turn over Al Qaeda, and the U.S. Came in. So, yes, I think there is something to this accusation that the Taliban in Afghanistan are harboring the TTP. But this is a broader issue. Again, we have to look at it in a nuanced fashion. TTP also has a strong presence on the Pakistan side of the border, and there have been a number of security operations just in recent days in which Pakistani forces have targeted TTP on the Pakistan side as well. So, this is a really difficult crisis for Pakistan. And, we've seen that successive rounds of talks between Pakistani representatives and the regime in Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, have not been successful, even when influential third-party actors like China have mediated talks. That's an indication that, it's going to be really difficult to work through this crisis. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Michael Kugelman.
Thank you.